Welcome to the Explainer. You ever wonder what a letter from like 2,000 years ago could possibly teach us about leadership and misinformation today? Well, we're about to find out. We're going to dive deep into just one chapter of the Bible, 1 Timothy 4, and you'll see it's packed with strategies that are incredibly relevant for navigating a crisis.
So let's get the picture here. There's this young leader, Timothy, and he's in charge of a community in the ancient city of Ephesus. And let me tell you, this is no easy gig. He's not just planning events, he is dealing with a serious, tangled mess of false information and fighting within his own group. Or as one expert puts it, Timothy is in deep weeds.
And this wasn't just, a simple disagreement. Timothy's mentor, Paul, he sees right to the heart of the issue, and what he sees is something way more sinister. He says this whole conflict is actually a spiritual battle, that these ideas causing all the chaos, they aren't just human mistakes. And Paul does not mince words. He says, straight up, these aren't just different opinions. He calls them things taught by demons. Wow. That completely changes the game, right? This isn't a debate club anymore. It's a high-stakes fight for the soul of the community. This is just a chilling description. The people spreading these lies aren't just confused. Paul says their moral compass is totally broken. Their conscience has been seared. It's like it's been burned so badly with a hot iron that they literally can't feel the difference between right and wrong anymore. That's dangerous. So, what were these teachings that were causing so much trouble? I mean, what kind of ideas could be so dangerous that they were threatening to tear this entire community apart? And what's so interesting is that the lies targeted two of the most fundamental parts of being human, our relationships and what we eat. By telling people they couldn't marry or eat certain foods, these teachers were pushing a kind of fake spirituality. They made it seem like being holy meant rejecting the good things God actually created for us to enjoy. Okay, and this is where it starts to sound really, really modern. I mean, we don't hear a lot of people explicitly forbidding marriage today, but think about the cultural pressures we all face. The idea that you have to hit a certain career level or achieve total self-realization before you can even think about settling down. It can have the exact same effect, pushing marriage and family way down the list of priorities. So, how in the world do you fight back against ideas that sound super spiritual but are actually sucking the life out of people? Well, Paul's strategy isn't to create a bunch of new, complicated rules. Instead, he gives Timothy a really simple but powerful truth as a solution. So what do? How do you argue against ideas that take something good and twist it into something bad? Paul's game plan is actually pretty straightforward, but it's also incredibly profound. And here it is. This is the heart of it. Everything God created is good. Period. So the way to be holy isn't to reject things, it's to receive them with a thankful heart. You see how that shifts everything? It's not about what you're doing, eating the food, getting married. It's about how you're doing it, with gratitude. And that begs the question, right? What makes these good gifts holy or set apart for the right purpose? Well, it's not by avoiding them. It's by understanding their true purpose through the lens of faith, what Paul calls the Word of God, and then accepting them with gratitude, which is pretty much the definition of prayer. Okay, so Paul has laid out the truth, but just knowing the right answer isn't enough, especially when you're in the weeds. So Paul switches gears from big ideas to a practical workout plan. He's giving Timothy the tools to not just believe the truth, but to actually live it. He tells him, point blank, stop wasting your time and energy on weird speculative myths. Instead, he says, train yourself for godliness. And that word for train is an athletic word, like what an Olympian would do. It means focused, disciplined, hard work. And this comparison just makes the priorities so clear. Paul's not saying the gym is bad. He says physical training has some value, but he puts it in perspective. Spiritual fitness or godliness is so much more important because its benefits aren't just for now. They last forever. So, building on this whole idea of training, Paul then gets, as Dr. Yarbrough calls it, nose to nose with Timothy. It gets intense. He just unleashes this rapid-fire list of commands for how Timothy should lead. Just listen to these words: command, teach, set an example, devote, be diligent, persevere. This is not a relaxed, kick your feet up kind of job description. This is a call for an all-in, totally committed, proactive leader. And this wasn't just a one-time thing for Paul. All through his letters, he uses words like labor, toil, striving. The message couldn't be clearer. This work of leadership isn't some easy gig. It's a calling that demands an absolutely relentless work ethic. So why? Why all this intensity? Why the constant talk about diligence and perseverance and hard labor? Because, and this is crucial, the stakes could not possibly be any higher. I mean, this is a jaw-dropper. Paul isn't just saying, hey, do a good job. He's telling Timothy that his personal lifestyle and his commitment to teaching the truth are the very things that will save both him and his people, as in rescue them from this whole destructive path of lies. Now, to really get how this works, we have to wrap our heads around a pretty big idea. It's called the ontological priority of the future. It sounds complicated, but it's basically this. The true, real meaning of what we do today is only determined by how it all turns out in the end. Think about it like this. For Timothy, stuck there in the deep weeds in Ephesus, his day-to-day struggles probably felt kind of small, maybe even pointless. But when you look at it from the future, from the final outcome, those exact same struggles are what's leading his community to salvation. The ending is what gives the struggle its meaning. So at the end of the day, here's the bottom line. Leadership isn't just a position or a title. According to this ancient text, a leader's personal discipline and their dogged commitment to truth have literal life and death consequences that ripple out into eternity for everyone they lead. And that leaves us with a pretty massive question to chew on, doesn't it? In our own lives, in our jobs, with our families, if what we do every single day has eternal stakes, what exactly are we training for? Because the answer to that question, well, it changes everything.